like making sure. That's all right. I need 45 days.
So, stay right on the corner.
Right on the corner.
Yeah. So we don't need all three if we have this one
I
right
was to
here.
say, yeah, we're good.
Yeah. Get that phone there.
Yeah, put that right there. So, okay, there we
It's
go.
live.
Yeah,
I won't even
Test,
one
test.
Huh? You're right.
I know.
So, okay, so we're gonna do so. Don't forget, sing straight. If you can't get the harmonies, just sing straight.
I am. I will.
One, two, three. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. That's all we need to do right there.
All right, cool.
Watch your notes.
Watch the
Watch your
yes,
notes.
ma'am.
Yeah, watch your notes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, that's good. We're good.
Oh, look, let me not stop.
And let's sing it with vigor.
Right here. Oh, nice to meet you. Guys, I'm getting an order from first through seven. Just keep moving right now. We're gonna sit down here. We're just practicing. You can keep your jacket on. We're practicing, and then we're gonna go sit down there. First. Hello. Hello. First. Second. You should know where you are. Are we using that microphone? Craig?
Yeah.
Are we using that microphone?
Yeah, I think so. I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
So this is gonna work out perfect because I'm gonna be back here now.
Hey there, Brianna. Can you hear me okay on WebEx?
Hi, Sean. This is Brianna. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Brianna. Is that okay?
Yes. I'm just trying to figure out who will be presenting today because we can't see anything on the WebEx.
Okay, no problem. I think there's just only one slide, and that's all.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
No problem. Catch ya.
I am a WNBA player who plays for the Los Angeles Sparks. I shoot an average of 14 points a game. My position is a forward. Who am I?
Because everybody's not as tall as you are.
Lisa Leslie.
I'm Candace Parker.
And go sit on the front row. Next person.
Wait. I escaped to freedom in the north. I got at least 70 slaves to freedom. I worked as a Union scout and spy during the Civil War. Who am I?
Harriet Tubman. You want them to come this way instead? Okay.
I refuse to surrender my seat.
Wait a minute. She's gonna come. We're gonna do these steps instead. Okay.
All right. Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
I refused to surrender my seat on the bus to a white man. I was arrested and the bus was boycott began. My arrest launched a nationwide attempt to end racism. Who am I?
Rosa Parks. And when you guys sit down, they still say the people's name.
I was third overall in the 1984 draft. I was Rookie of the Year, 1985. I have 4 scoring titles. Who am I?
Michael Jordan. Guys, you're still saying their names at your seats. Okay?
I fought for the equal rights of African American children. I was the first African American child to desegregate the all-white Williams.
Get closer. Okay.
I fought for the equal rights of African American children. I was the first African American child to desegregate the all-white William Frantz Elementary School. I now have a statue of myself in front of that same school. Who am I? Bridges.
You guys have to come too.
I am an astronaut. I was the first African American woman to travel into space. I serve as the missions. I am an astronaut. I was the first African American woman to travel into space. I serve as a mission specialist aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Who am I? I am a track and field athlete. I am considered the fastest woman of all time because of the record I set in the 100 and 200 meter races. I won 3 gold medals in the 1988 Summer Olympics. Who am I?
We're coming down these steps. The ones that are okay.
How awesome is that?
Everybody's
Yes.
gonna sing.
Yes. If you want, you want. Here, leave your stuff. Come on. Here. No, that's not. I don't know, I shouldn't be playing this, but I am.
You got your dance moves ready, right? You might have to share. Two of you may have to share. You got Come on up here. They can, like two of them can share together. No. You're gonna lift every voice and sing, and then this down to here. That is victory one, and then God about where He is. So somebody did your paper. You might have to share.
Here, guys, hold up.
Yes. We're gonna
Yeah.
go over it. Yes.
1,
Looking really
3, 2.
Okay, we got a few minutes, so come on, who needs?
Testing 1, 2.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Shields. I'm the Deputy Director for the Center for Medicare and CHIP Services, and it is my genuine honor to serve as the executive sponsor for the CMS African American Employee Resource Group. It gives me great pleasure on behalf of the AAERG and the Office of Equal Opportunity and Civil Rights to welcome you to the 2020 African American History Month Observance event. At the end of the Civil War, our country was faced with a cultural metamorphosis that was unlike any in history, probably since the exodus of the slaves from Egypt. After a violent conflict that resulted in the reluctant reconsolidation of the Union of the American States, Congress had to decide upon the question of voting rights for former slaves who numbered over 3 million at the time and existed mostly in southern states. Frederick Douglass, whom we will see shortly and whom we are here to celebrate, weighed in about black suffrage in his address given in January 1867 in Washington, D.C. And among other concepts that he spoke about, he appealed to Congress for voting rights for black men at the time. His efforts and the efforts of many others resulted in the passing of the 15th Amendment, which prohibited the restriction of voting rights on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The amendment was passed on February 26, 1869, and was ratified February 3, 1870. I've always found it interesting that when you ask around to folks, a lot of folks believe that the right to vote for blacks was given in the 1960s. Change that is sustainable takes time, commitment, collaboration, and tenacity. It also requires heroes that are lauded during their time, and most that are lauded afterwards. The celebration of Black History Month to me is an example of a milestone in our history as a country that represents the continued progression in our culture post-Civil War struggle. Today we take time to reflect on our history via the theme for the CMS 2020 African American History Month observance, African Americans and the Vote. Frederick Douglass, one of the most influential African Americans of the 19th century, and he will talk about how he made a career of agitating the collective American conscience. To kick off our event, I would like to introduce you to Tamika Bell, the chairperson of the African American Employee Resource Group, who will lead us through today's program. I would like to congratulate and thank you all again, both those who are here and those who are watching us remotely, for being a key to CMS's diversity and inclusion process by supporting this event today. I will now turn the program over to Tamika.
Thank you very much, Ms. Karen. Greetings to everyone here in person and at the central office and on the phone or WebEx throughout the other CMS locations. Thank you all for attending. I am Tamika Bell. In addition to serving as the chair of the CMS African American Employee Resource Group, I am also a health insurance specialist in the Office of Information Technology. It is my privilege to moderate today's 2020 African American History Month Observance Program. African American History Month is an annual observance originating in the United States, also known as Black History Month. The CMS AAERG, along with the Office of Equal Opportunity and Civil Rights, is proud to plan this program to recognize and celebrate the important contributions of Black Americans throughout our nation's history. This year, the Planning Committee, CMS employees who volunteer as members of our Employee Resource Group, has designed another great event, including a performance by the Black Saga students from Chadwick Elementary School in Baltimore County, and a musical selection by our very own CMS choir, and a phenomenal keynote address to portray one of the most influential African Americans of the 19th century, Frederick Douglass. Briefly, to highlight some history, Frederick Douglass spoke and wrote on behalf of a variety of reform causes, such as voting rights, women's rights, temperance, peace, land reform, free public education, and the abolition of capital punishment. However, he devoted the bulk of his time, immense talent, and boundless energy to ending slavery and gaining equal rights for African Americans. Frederick Douglass laid the groundwork for African Americans in Black History Month. In 1847, Frederick Douglass moved to Rochester, New York, and started a newspaper called the North Star. And during this time, 5 states allowed Black men to vote: Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. New York also allowed voting, however, due to the very strict residency and property ownership laws, not many were availed the opportunity to vote. In 1867, Frederick Douglass weighed in on one of the most contentious issues of the day, suffrage for Black men following the Civil War. His address, given in January 1867 in Washington, D.C., among other concepts, also appealed to Congress for voting rights for Black men. We will hear more from Frederick Douglass in a bit, but to get this observance going, I would like to introduce the students, the Black Saga students from Chadwick Elementary School, hosted by Ms. Ladson. Please come to the stage and welcome them. And as they come to the stage, I'll share with you that the Black Saga students is an after-school program at Chadwick Elementary School, and these students memorize important or African-American facts for competition in the county, Baltimore County Black Saga competition. So please welcome them again. Thank you.
I am a WNBA player who plays for the Los Angeles Sparks. I shoot an average of 14 points a game. My position is a forward. Who am I?
Candace Parker. Candace Parker.
I escaped to freedom in the North. I got at least 70 slaves to freedom. I worked as a Union scout and spy during the Civil War. Who am I?
Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman.
I refused to surrender my seat on the bus to a white man. I was arrested and the boycott began. My arrest launched a nationwide attempt to end racism. Who am I?
Rosa Parks.
I was third overall in the 1984 draft. I was Rookie of the Year, 1985. I have 4 scoring titles. Who am I?
Michael Jordan.
I fought for the equal rights of African American children. I was the first African American child to desegregate the all-white William Frantz Elementary School. I now have a statue of myself in front of that same school. Who am I?
Ruby Bridges.
I am an astronaut. I was the first African American woman to travel into space. I served as the mission specialist aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Who am I?
Mae Jemison.
I am a track and field athlete. I'm considered the fastest woman of all time because of this record I set in the 100 and 200 meter races. I won 3 gold medals in the 1988 Summer Olympics. Who am I?
Okay, let's have a round of applause. Thank you, Black Saga students. So actually now I would like to bring to the stage the CMS choir to sing the Black National Anthem, and we've also invited the Black Saga students to sing this selection with our choir. Please come to the stage and welcome them with a clap.
Thank you all. I wanted to take this opportunity to invite the children with us this morning, to just have them to come and do something that they normally do not do, which is to sing along with the choir, although we're small today, and join in with the Black National Anthem. It's important for them to recognize what this month is and to be able to participate. Thank you. You ready?
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let every sound loud as the rolling sea.
Sing a song.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
God of our weary years.
God of our weary years. God of our silent tears. brought us thus far on the way. Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the paths we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you.
Yes. Beautiful.
That was beautiful. Thank you again. Can I have another round of applause for the Black Saga Group students and our CMS choir? Now I have the privilege to introduce to you our guest, Mr. Nathan M. Richardson, an accomplished performance poet and published author. His published collections, Nathan M. Richardson, his published collections are Likeness of Being and 21 Imaginary T-shirts. He has also contributed to the following anthologies: The Poet's Domain, The Cupola, The Channel Marker, and Skipping Stones. Nathan Richardson has been a featured author at the following writers' conferences or festivals: the James River Writers Festival, the Christopher Newport University Writers Conference, the Paul D. Camp Community College Literary Festival, the Norfolk State University William Carroll Literary Festival, and the Hampton Roads Writers Conference. Nationally, Mr. Richardson's poetry has been commissioned to accent major art exhibits at the Delaware Museum of Art, the New Mexico Holocaust Museum, and the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. For the past 5 years, he has been the resident creative writing instructor for the Artistic Versus Creative Writing Program sponsored by Newport News Public High Schools and the Peninsula Fine Arts Center. His past residencies include creative writing instructor for the Camp Rise Summer Arts Program, which was awarded the 2012 National Arts and Humanities Youth Program Award from the White House. One of Mr. Richardson's latest projects is the Frederick Douglass Speaking Tour. This is now entering its 5th season and growing in content and popularity across the United States. Poet, author, and spoken word performer, Mr. Nathan M. Richardson captures completely the physical and spiritual essence of the great writer, orator, and abolitionist, Frederick Douglass. I now present to you Mr. Nathan Richardson as Frederick Douglass.
Thank you. Good evening, fellow citizens. Good evening. It is, well, I believe it's evening. Sometimes, this watch got stuck in February of 1897, but I think it's evening. It's so happy to see you all here today. I'm very happy to be invited to the CMS, African American Association read-in, and to the children, I was delighted to find that they were going to be here as well. To the Equal Opportunity Board and this fine institution, I really thank you, and I come with unusual diffidence. I think normally I would start my narrative by telling you who I am, and many of you already had some introduction. I think my understudy got most of the introduction, but you might know who I am. I am Frederick Douglass. I was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey on the Eastern Shore in Talbot County near St. Michael's. And before I get into my narrative, I thought, reminded of a speech that I gave November 17th of 1865, right here in Baltimore. And so I thought I would break protocol in giving my speech at the end. I might give you a sample of that speech at the very beginning. Now, of course, my speeches and the speeches of the 19th century were quite long. Normally, they would be an hour at least. But I understand you are working people, and the 21st century has a short attention span. So I will give you an abbreviated version of that speech that I gave right here in Baltimore, Maryland, called A Friendly Word to Maryland, in which it was right after they had abolished slavery and changed their constitution. And I met an audience similar to this. And what I said to them that day was effectively this: I come here with unusual diffidence. I have been long identified with the woman suffrage movement. I can remember, if I can give a speech, I could think I could do it right here amongst my old friends, where I first heard the gentle voice of Father Waters for the first time. I left the state of Maryland more than a quarter century ago. I was in the full, fresh bloom of early manhood. Not one lock, all of my hair, was tinged with time or sorrow. I was full of the aspirations of youth and perhaps ambition also. Now I am not young, and the frost of winter is visibly on my head. Time has, I am glad to see, touched many of you gently. Had any man told me that I would be here tonight speaking to a Baltimore audience, I would have thought him about as insane as if he had predicted I would one day go on a mission to the moon. But you have called me to speak, and I have obeyed your call. Maryland is now a glorious free state. The return of the dove to the ark with a leaf is a sure sign that the flood has subsided. My coming among you is a sign that the bitter waters of slavery have now subsided. But I want to make one thing clearly understood. I come not to reproach Maryland for what happened in her borders in years gone by. I come not to condemn the past, but to commend and rejoice over the future. Even in the gloomiest days of her history and of my own, I have held this native state with the joy of an exiled son. I have a few things to say, both to the white and colored citizens of this state, and I crave the indulgence and the attention of both classes. First, to my colored friends. To my white friends. So much, my white fellow citizens, you have done, and well done. There is, however, one other thing needed to make your work good and complete. One demands the restoration of all rights. I stand here, therefore, to advocate the practice and doctrine of absolute civil and political equality. Let no part of slavery remain above ground now that the monster is dead. Let the shadow and the substance go down together, and let them sleep forever in a common grave. There is, however, a class of writers and speakers among you who seem to distrust your ability to cope with the colored people without special protection. I deny that the black man's degradation is essential to the white man's elevation. I deny that the black man should be tied lest he outstrip you in the race for improvement. I deny the existence of any such necessity and confirm that those who allege the existence of any such pay a sorry compliment to the race of white people. Now, some comments to my colored friends. With the adoption of the new Constitution, your condition is radically changed. But I believe those living in the lower counties of Maryland should stick to your agricultural pursuits. $150 in the country is better than $400 in the city. For the colored people who crowd Maryland, the alleys and by streets, woe betide them. Sad indeed will be their fate. You should stick to your agricultural pursuits and endeavor to buy land. You should be saving your funds and building homes and churches and schools. Let the finger of scorn point to any colored man who refuses to send his children to school. I believe the black man is just as capable as the white. And we all have now an opportunity to make this great state of Maryland a land of opportunity of all people, regardless of race and sex. In the mantra of my newspaper, right is of no sex, truth is of no color. God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren. Amen. And so, that effectively marked my return to Maryland after years of servitude on the Eastern Shore. I was born around the Tuckahoe River on the Eastern Shore around the year 1818. I do not know the date of my birth, as slaves did not know the dates of their birth. The closest we could come would be planting time, harvest time, cherry time. You see, the slave masters, and the mantra of the slave master is an educated slave is a worthless slave. And so they kept all knowledge from me, as was the condition of slave-holding states, slave-breeding states, including Virginia and Maryland and North Carolina, that my mother, after she gave birth to me, she was sold to a plantation about 12 miles away. I never saw my mother during the light of day. She would occasionally walk 24 miles round trip just to rock me to sleep at night. And by the time I woke the next morning, she would be gone back to her plantation to work in the field. I can remember being on the plantation and being a very hungry child. Hardly anything to wear. You see the situation on a plantation at that time, and I'll read to you just briefly from my narrative. And I wrote 3 autobiographies in my lifetime. Narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, My Bondage and My Freedom, and Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. I also, of course, as was mentioned here, I published my own newspaper, the North Star newspaper. But here I'm reading from my first narrative of what it would have been like to be a captive in the 19th century. Here, too, the slaves of all the farms received their monthly allowance of food and their annual clothing allowance. The men and women, for their annual or their monthly allowance of food, this is for the family, 8 pounds of pork or its equivalent of fish. I can remember the children even being fed in the afternoons at a trough, just like so many hogs or cows, scooping up the food, the mush, with a leaf or a shell or your hands. The more you ate, the faster you ate, the more you got. The slower you ate, the less you got. Now, the clothing. For those working in the fields, 2 linen shirts, 1 pair of trousers like the shirts, 1 coarse shirt made of coarse Negro cloth, 1 pair of trousers like the shirts, 1 pair of stockings, and 1 pair of shoes, the whole of which could have cost no more than $7. The children, too young to work in the field, would have received neither shoes, nor stockings, nor jackets, nor trousers. Boys and girls, 2 linen shirts per year, and when those fail you, you would have been naked for the rest of the year, regardless of the weather. And so in times like this, I slept on the cold, hard ground with a burlap bag over my head, and my feet were often out, and I got frostbite big enough to put a pencil in. Yes, that was my situation. I can remember, though, trying to curb my appetite, I had a voice for singing. Oh, and great song. I appreciate the song. My understudy was talking to one of the members of the choir, and she said that you might be able to sing Go Down Moses. Could you sing that today? Maybe. That would be a task, I think. Yeah. Well, Go Down Moses is certainly one of my favorite songs. But I would stand under the window of Miss Lucretia Hall, and I would be certainly hungry, and she liked the sound of my voice, and I would sing a song to her. Let the heaven light shine on me. Let the heaven light shine on me. For lo is the way to the upper bright world. Let the heaven light shine on me. And she would open the window and she would say, "Young man, Freddie, I think one day heaven will smile upon you." And I would be saying to myself, if you passed down a biscuit, it would be heaven right now. I was a hungry young boy. Well, I managed to take care of that hunger, and there came a time when Mrs. All called me. She said, "Freddie, we're going to send you to Baltimore to live with our cousins, Mr. Hugh and Sophie All." She said, "We're going to give you your first pair of pants." I don't know which excited me more, getting my first pair of pants or leaving the plantation, but I got my first pair of pants. She put me on a ship, and we arrived in Baltimore. The handler took me down to Fells Point. We knocked on the door of my master, Hugh and Sophia All. Now, they were city people, and they were not accustomed to having slaves before. I was quite surprised that a white woman would be opening the door, smiling at me, beaming, saying, "Freddie, come on in. We've been waiting for you. Are you hungry? Are you tired? We have a bed prepared for you." Well, you see, Mrs. All, she had a kind reputation, a generous heart. She had never owned slaves before, and so she took me in. I was to be the helpmate for their young son, Master Thomas. Now, she liked to read and write. She would sit in her rocking chair and she would read the Bible or the newspaper, and I would cozy up next to her and I would get an A, B, or C. She risked her reputation to teach me how to read and write. And of course, once I had a few letters, children, a few words to describe my misery as a slave, my mind became free and thus my body had to follow. You know you cannot enslave a freed mind. Once your mind is free, your body has to follow. And so I used every trick I could to learn a few letters. I would trade the letters for biscuits as we walked to school and back. I would even trick the boys into teaching me a letter or so. I would say to the young master, "Young master, do you believe I can make a W?" And he would say, "What slave can write? Who taught you how to make a W?" And I said, "Well, if you show me how to make a Q, I will show you I can make a W." And we would kneel down in the sand, and I would make a W, and then he would have to show me how to make a Q. Can you imagine, children, having to steal every alphabet just to know your ABCs? You do know your ABCs, do you not? Yes, you know you were given the whole basket, weren't you? All the letters in one song, I bet. So I had to steal every letter. Now, there came a time, though, that Mrs. All, her husband, came to her, and he said to his wife, "Mother, I understand you're teaching Freddie how to read." She said, "Well, yes, husband, just a few letters. It won't hurt anything." I distinctly heard him say, "Do not teach that boy how to read. You know it's against the rules. An educated slave is a worthless slave." And so from that point on, the light that I saw in her eyes in the beginning started to fade like the sun on the horizon. That kind and generous spirit started to fade away as slavery took over. You see, slavery destroys not only the black man, but the white man as well. You cannot chain a man without chaining yourself. And so that kind spirit that she had soon disappeared. And as the master said, an educated slave is a worthless slave. I started to become worthless to them. I was very agitated and wanted to run away. They sent me back to Talbot County. They put me under the servitude of a notorious slave breaker by the name of Mr. Edward Covey. Now, Mr. Covey wanted to break my spirit, but he was certainly not successful. After that, they sent me back to Baltimore. Now, I'm in Baltimore, and I'm working in the shipyards in Fells Point, and I'm learning a trade, and I'm shining shoes on the street, and I'm still paying attention to the fact that these schoolboys are carrying books and they're getting their education. And so I saved 75 cents, and I purchased the very first book that I ever had. And I have a copy right here. It's called The Columbian Orator. It's full of great speeches and poems, and the schoolboys were required to recite and memorize these poems. As a matter of fact, the very first poem that I learned how to recite is in this book. Maybe I can get some of the children to come help me read. Yes, young boy right there. Come up and help me. And you, young lady, come up, come up. And young lady, I believe you call yourself Minty and Anamita Ross. Harriet Tubman? Yes, come up. Come up. Now, you all are going to help me read. This is the very first poem that I learned how to recite out loud. And here it is right here in the book. And so we're going to do this in a call and response format. I will say the line, and then you repeat after me. You hold the book. And the verse is right there. It says, you'd scarce expect one of my age. Now you have to read in unison, all right? Now, some introductions first. What is your name? Excuse me? Imani. Very nice to meet you, Imani. And you, sir? Javon, yes. And you, ma'am? Amira. Nice to meet you all. Now, are you ready to read? Are you ready to read? Yes. Are you ready to listen? Yes. Well, let us read. You'd scarce expect one of my age. You'd scarce expect one of my age. To speak in public on the stage. To speak in public on the stage. And if I chance to fall below. And if I chance to fall below. Demosthenes or Cicero. Well, you did a pretty good job pronouncing. They did a good job. Give them a round of applause. They're not easy words to pronounce, Demosthenes and Cicero. We're going to stop right there because here is a lesson. Do you know who Demosthenes and Cicero are? No? Well, they were great philosophers. One was Greek and one was Roman. But the lesson is, of course, the reason we're stopping is that if you're reading, children, and you don't know the word, you can't pronounce it, you don't know the definition thereof, you don't keep going like you know what it is. You should stop right there. You should ask your parents. You should ask your teacher. The librarian. What is the definition of this word? Who are these people? You do want to pass the test at the end of the day, do you not? Mm-hmm. Yes. So let us continue. Don't view me with the critic's eye. Don't view me with the critic's eye. But pass my imperfections by. But pass my imperfections by. Large streams from little fountains flow. Tall oaks from little acorns grow. And though I know I now am small and young, of judgment weak and feeble tongue, yet all great learned men and women like me once learned to read their ABC. Yes, very good reading. Yes, very good. Now, before you go, ladies, you observe that a woman was not in the text there, was it? No. And why do you think I included woman in the conversation when woman was left out? Why do you think I made sure that you were included in this conversation? Exactly. Women and men should be able to read. Not only read, but they should be equal all around. We were fighting for universal suffrage. I'm a woman suffrage man, and women were disenfranchised in the 19th century. They couldn't own businesses. Even this audience here would be considered a promiscuous audience, men and women sitting together. And so anytime I have an opportunity, I'm going to stand up for the rights of women. So that's why I included you on the stage and included you in the conversation. Thank you so much for helping me out. All right. Thank you. Yes. So we're going to camp meetings on the weekends down in Baltimore. And at this camp meeting, I meet a young woman by the name of Anna Murray. She's a free woman. And we're talking about that I want to be free. I told her about the fact that I had tried to escape one time already and had been caught, captured, put in jail. My master bonded me out after 3 months. And so we devised a plan that I would dress up like a sailor and escape from Baltimore to New York. I would dress up like a sailor, catch a train, and that plan worked. I dressed up like a sailor, and the next thing I know, I was in New York, where I experienced freedom for the first time, or a pseudo-freedom. I was on the streets of New York. Food was everywhere. Housing was everywhere. But I had no money, so I was might as well have been a slave. I had no opportunity to get any of this without a wage. And I was very frightened of the fact that there were not only bounty hunters, but Negroes who were conspiring with bounty hunters to capture you and send you back to the South. Well, we quickly moved from New York to New Bedford, Massachusetts. We were living with Mr. Nathan and Polly Johnson, and of course, I had changed my name from Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. My runaway name was Frederick Johnson. Now, we're living with Nathan and Polly Johnson, and it seems like every Negro that runs away to New Bedford names himself Johnson. I said, there are too many Johnsons here. I need to change my name. And so Mr. Johnson was reading a poem at the time, Lady of the Lake, and he suggested that I name myself after the main character, Douglas. And so I did. And so you now know me as Frederick Douglass. Now, we moved, of course, he introduced us to a fine minister at Pennington, and we got married, and we moved to Lynn, Massachusetts, where I met the great William Lloyd Garrison. Now, here's where I started speaking, and they started to question my authenticity. They said, well, you say this man is a slave, and he can speak so well, he can write. Surely he's not a slave. You send him off to Howard University or something, and now you're pointing him off as a slave. So Mr. Garrison said, well, you just need to start naming places and dates of the incidents you've seen, these atrocities of slavery. And that I did, and I also made notes, and I wrote the first draft of my autobiography. When I handed the manuscript to Mr. Garrison, well, he looked at it and he said, you need to either throw this in the fire or we need to get you out of the country. And so they did the latter. They sent me to England for 21 months. I landed in Liverpool. I was only supposed to be in Ireland for 4 days, and I ended up there for 4 months. Are there any Irish in the audience? Anyone of Irish heritage? Yes. The Irish people were great noble people, very impoverished, right before the potato famine. I would describe them as slaves without the shackles, but they were very noble. Even the great Daniel O'Connell took me in his office and fed me lunch, and I had dinner with him. He treated me not as chattel property, but as an equal man. I moved on to England, which they had already abolished slavery as well. The people there raised money to purchase my freedom. Anyone care to guess how much they raised, negotiated with my master to purchase my freedom? How much do you think it was? Someone said 300. Can I get 301? Well, you laugh. We were auctioned at the block. Whole families separated. The huts left vacant. But they raised $733.16. They gave me a proposition. Why even go back to America? That's the land of slavery. This is a free land. We'll send for your family. We'll bring your children over here. We'll help you buy a house and some land. Well, I had something to consider. Stay here or go back and fight for the abolition of my brothers and sisters I left on the plantation. Millions of men and women in bondage. And so I chose the latter. I came back. Took my family from Lynn, Massachusetts to Rochester. She spoke of Rochester. We spent several decades in Rochester. There's where I met the woman suffrage movement. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, all these women of the suffrage movement. They even invited me to be the master of ceremony for the first women's conference in 1848. Now, of course, this was leading up to the antebellum and the Civil War. I started to lobby Abraham Lincoln to let the black man fight in the Civil War. At first they said, well, we won't let the black man fight. I said, well, why not? We were part of the Revolutionary War. The black man helped found the country. The black men and men of Massachusetts. Mom Bet, a woman. Crispus Attucks, all these people fought for the founding of the country, then why should we not fight for the Civil War? Well, eventually, Abraham Lincoln, as prudent as he was, saw it my way. They added the black soldier to the fight. I immediately recruited two of my sons, Charles and Lewis. They joined the 54th Regiment. They sent my other son, Frederick Jr., down to the Mississippi Valley, where he started to recruit troops. And of course, then General Butler, seeing that we needed to bring an end to all of this, he signed an edict at Fort Monroe. Hundreds of slaves, runaways, started to come to Fort Monroe to claim themselves as contraband. And, of course, on that first day of January 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And so many said, well, the abolition is over now. We can stop the fight. I said, nonsense. We cannot fight. We cannot stop this fight. We still cannot vote. We can't own land. We still have much to be fighting for. And so we continue to fight alongside the women. We were fighting for universal suffrage. Now, I was asked to speak to you all on this particular peculiar topic of the fact that although we have differences, those differences might be our strengths. You see, there was a big difference between, say, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott, who were white women, and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Francis C.W. Jacobs. These were black women. They were all fighting for suffrage. They were all fighting for the abolition of slavery, but they were of different class, of different wealth and economic. But nevertheless, we worked together. We used the differences to make a coalition of people who could do some great things. And we stepped across the line and we did that. And that would be a suggestion to you all in this modern era, where you might have a divided line that is so crystal clear that no one can step across the line and consult with one another to fight for a common good across the horizon. You see, the differences we have right here mean little to the ultimate objective on the horizon. And so if you can work together, you can accomplish great things. But if you don't, of course, then they're going to do you just like they did us. They're going to divide and conquer you. You see, when the 15th Amendment was passed, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, we had all been talking. I was talking frequently with these women about the fact that we wanted women to vote as well. And everywhere I went, to all the conferences, the women did not want the women to speak. The men did not want them to speak. They did not want to give them their rights. And eventually, when that vote came, they said it was not time for the women. The women had to stand aside. And so when, of course, those women of privilege got the word that they had to stand aside, they were very upset. Men, beware of the woman scorn. And the differences we had as far as social and economic class, the prejudice that these women had for the black man, even though they were fighting on our side, started to come out. And the newspapers exploited. There were things printed in the newspaper that Elizabeth Cady Stanton said about me as a Negro. Well, you think that I didn't already know that she was a privileged class? I was not surprised. I knew these women for decades. But nevertheless, I continued to work with them. But what the tragedy was that they were able to exploit those differences. And so I didn't speak to these women again after the 15th Amendment for 40 years. I didn't even speak to Susan B. Anthony until, well, I believe it was the last day of my life, when she finally came to Washington, D.C., and I went down to see her. So much was lost in that time frame, from the time the 15th Amendment was signed and ratified until the last day of my life, somewhere around 1895, much was lost. We could have still been working together. So there's a lesson for you all in this building. If you're trying to do good things for the public, if you're trying to serve the common good, you need to come together and do what's right for America. This Constitution, regardless of how you feel about it, is the best thing we have. Well, I consider it a great document. Even though our founding fathers had some flaws, we cannot put everything on our founding fathers. Men seldom eulogize the virtues and fame of their forefathers without leaving out some folly or wickedness of their own. Yes, we can't put it all on our forefathers that they were such great men. We have a responsibility to make this living document more amenable to a more perfect union. That's our job. And we cannot live on our father's wages or our mother's wages. And so those are the things I was able to accomplish. And after that, after the Civil War, after Abraham Lincoln's unfortunate assassination, I became the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia. I was the ambassador to the country of Haiti, the president of the Freedmen's Bank and Trust. So I accomplished many things, including the fact that I was the first black man to be nominated as a vice presidential candidate, alongside the first woman. Yes, the first woman. Can you tell me who the first woman was to run for president, ladies? Hillary Clinton. I don't know who she is. Everywhere I go in the modern era, they say Hillary Clinton. I don't know who that woman is. The first woman to run for president was Victoria Woodhull. Yes, the great state of Kentucky nominated her, and they sent me a telegram. They said, Mr. Douglas, we'd like you to run alongside Victoria Woodhull. I said, well, I will not run. They said, well, I thought you were a woman's rights man. I said, well, it's not because she's a woman. I'm not a politician. I won't come to Baltimore and tell the audience one thing and then go to D.C. and say something completely different. I am for the 100% enfranchisement of the black man in American society. So it doesn't matter how well you feed me, you give me a good place to sleep, a soft pillow. When it's time for me to talk, I'm going to stand up and speak for what is right. And so those are things that I was able to accomplish in my lifetime, and I hope you can take some lessons from it. Maybe you have some questions. I don't want to take all of your time today, but if you have a few questions, maybe one or two, I'll be happy to entertain any questions you might have about my life and times. Anyone? Just raise your hand. Come, yes, stand up. She said, how old was I when I escaped? I was 18 years old. This is when I had met my then fiancée, Anna Murray, and I was around 18 years old, and I made my escape. Yes. Next question. Come now, there are no overseers keeping you from asking questions. Speak your mind. Don't wait until I'm gone and then want to ask me a question. Well, you can open the book, certainly, and you can find out. You can read my narrative and find out. Yes, sir, please stand up. You had a question?
Yeah, when you traveled around, when you traveled around from area to area within the United States, other than train, how did you travel?
Well, I traveled by boat. I certainly traveled by horse and cart, and it's very rocky roads, especially in Ireland. Those very rough country in Ireland. But I went everywhere from the Giant's Causeway to Cape Fear. And the traveling, can you imagine even just going to speak from Rochester to Washington, D.C.? You don't have the modern conveniences of travel. It took me, it was planning involved in just going to give a speech. Yes, ma'am.
How long were you married? How many children did you have? And did they have a role in your movement?
Oh, absolutely. I was married for 40 years to Anna Murray. She gave me 5 children: Charles, Louis, Frederick Jr., Rosetta, and Annie. Now, Annie passed away when she was 10 years old. She passed away from consumption, which is a disease of the lungs, and she couldn't breathe very well. Unfortunately, I happened to be out of the country at the time. I was running, they had caught this slave breaker by the name of, this abolitionist by the name of John Brown. The raid on Harper's Ferry, and they found some documents on him that might lead you to believe that I was a part of that raid on Harper's Ferry, and I had to leave the country. And so when I got the telegram about my daughter passing away, I immediately came back to America. Of course, and they were the 4 children who lived to adults, especially Rosetta. I was quite proud of her. She helped me in my newspaper, and they all became successful adults. One of my sons worked here in Washington, D.C. in the records department and as a records keeper, and another one was a real estate investor, and Rosetta, she was certainly in the newspaper business. Yes. So I was quite proud of them. Of course, my second wife, after my first wife passed away, after a long illness, and she passed away, and I had quite a bit of time that I was quite depressed. And then I remarried. And married Helen Pitts, who happened to be 20 years my junior. Yes, and white. Well, you're taking it very well. much better than my family took it at the time. They said, Mr. Douglas, why the abolitionists marrying a white woman?
So I have a question to get you out of trouble.
Yes.
Who did more for civil rights, Lincoln or Grant?
Lincoln or Grant? Well, certainly Abraham Lincoln did. Abraham Lincoln, it was not for his prudence in signing the Emancipation Proclamation, then we would be two separate countries. Now, Grant came along after that, and he was certainly, he tried to, unfortunately, this is what happened. After the Emancipation Proclamation, we had Reconstruction, and this Reconstruction document was to really bring the black man back into the fold. President Johnson didn't do a good job with this Reconstruction. And when he handed it off to President Grant, even less was able to done. No financing, no funding to make sure that that this Reconstruction was handled properly. And so without funding, Reconstruction soon fell apart. And so Grant did as much as he could, but Abraham Lincoln, we would not even be here if we were not for his great contributions to the country. Yes, we had some questions from the children.
When you was 18, where was your family when you was escaping?
Well, I left my family in Talbot County when I escaped. It pained me to a great degree to leave my family to try to escape. This is what many slaves had to deal with, is to run away or stay with your family. And so I chose to run away. Now, when I was in England and Ireland, my wife and my children, they were in Lynn, Massachusetts. She was doing a good job of taking care of the family and keeping the house until I returned. So, yes. So, two more questions, and I think that would be it for the day. I think we have one on the back row.
Yes, how did you obtain the funds when you were in New York to travel to different cities?
Well, my wife, Rosetta, and there was actually an organization of women doing things to raise money. They would be the Quilting Society, the Anti-Slavery Quilting Society of Rochester. They were making all kinds of goods and having bake sales and things like that to raise money. I was selling my books. I was selling the North Star newspaper. So all these things went into the fact that we were able to have money to travel. And of course, we were part of the Underground Railroad as well. You might know, young lady, that I was in Rochester living on South Avenue, and one night in the middle of the night, I knocked at our door, and there was Harriet Tubman with 7 runaways. She had come all the way from Virginia to Rochester with 7 runaways. We brought them in, gave them something to eat, a good night's sleep and some shoes, and they went on into Canada to their freedom. Yes. Well, that would be the last question. So one last question from the young man, and then that'll be it for the day.
How many siblings did you have?
Well, I had 1 brother and 2 sisters. One of my sisters was sold to Texas, but I eventually found all of my relatives. My mother passed away, though, when I was 6 years old, so I never saw her again. But I certainly appreciate the fact that you all were such an attentive audience today. I hope some of the things that I was able to do in my lifetime, some of the examples that I said in working with the women's suffrage movement, with Abraham Lincoln, gives you all some pause to reflect on how you may be able to work better in this great institution that is designed to serve the public. It would behoove you to do everything you can to make this great state of Maryland and America a land of opportunity for all men and women, regardless of race. Thank you. I am yours truly, Frederick Douglass.
Mr. Douglass, thank you so much for that rich history. I personally learned so much, and I hope you all did as well. Please join me in thanking Mr. Nathan M. Richardson one more time. Before I close, I just want to quickly give thanks to the Planning Committee for today's program. Within the African American Employee Resource Group, we have many subcommittees, and our Marketing and Communications small team was responsible for today's event. I'm so thankful for them. Those members are listed on the back of your program. Alethea Lucky, Heather Ross, Rashina Webb, and Sonny Williams. Thank you so much. We welcome the employees to get involved with the AAERG. It takes us to work together and put our creativity to bring awesome programs like this to CMS. So for next year's planning, I welcome you. And without further ado, I would like to bring the Director of the Office of Equal Opportunity and Civil Rights, Ms. Anita Pender, to close us out. Anita? Thank you again, everyone.
So hi, I'm Anita Pender, Director of the Office of Equal Opportunity and Civil Rights. So really just a few remarks in closing. And so each year CMS celebrates African American History Month to honor and remember some of the contributions made to our society by African Americans in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And today's program was designed to promote our understanding and acknowledgement of some of those significant contributions. I know I certainly enjoyed today's program. It's just one of 10 special emphasis programs that we have throughout the year. And really it's a number of goals, to promote cultural awareness, and that's including our understanding and valuing diversity and inclusion, fostering an environment where diverse people can work together to achieve our organizational goals, and also just to give a glimpse to educate us more, even about the populations that we serve with the work that we do here at CMS. And so, again, I want to thank the executive sponsor, Karen Shields, for being here today. Thank you, Karen. The African American ERG chairperson and our mistress of ceremonies today, Tamika Bell. And who knew we'd have such a star-studded cast today, that we will be joined by Candace Parker, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Michael Jordan, Ruby Bridges, Mae Jemison, and Floyd Griffith Jr. So you never know what you're going to get when you come to one of these programs. So thank you to Ms. Ladson and the Black Saga students of Chadwick Elementary School. And again, I was just struck by when she said it was an after-school program. So I'm going to stay in school all day, but then I'm going to make the commitment to stay after school to learn history, to memorize, and frankly to prepare for my future. Again, I can't imagine the poise and the willingness to be put on the spot to sing in a group in front of people that you never met before, and then to come up and read something you've never read before. So again, students, thank you very much. And of course, I have to thank Mr. Nathan Richardson for that wonderful portrayal and history lesson through the life of Frederick Douglass. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And again, just additional thank yous to the Office of Support Service and Operations, the Office of Communications, and the support of the Design Services team there. Again, the African American ERG Executive Board for providing leadership, and as an echoing Tamika's sentiments for the Planning Committee. Again, that partnership with the ERG really makes these events come to life and so much more special to us. And so just in closing, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to come to be present here in the audience, or if you participated virtually. So thank you also to those in Washington, D.C., Bethesda, and our regional offices. So my last request is that you give us feedback. We have the link to the SurveyMonkey evaluation tool, and so we listen to that feedback and we shape our future programs. So thank you for your attention, for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.